Well, please, everyone, welcome Vitalik here, joining us at DCxPrague. And as all of you know, because I won't shut up about it. Like, this is pretty last minute. The scheduling is pretty lightweight, and therefore we figured, after all of the talks that Vitalik did in Istanbul, like a easier appearance in a forum of an AMA, Ask Me Anything, would be suitable for now. So it's basically your session as well. I'll just hand over the mic to Vitalik, and you can ask questions. And of course, like, you feel free to do you and just say whatever.
Sure.
So what would be the first question?
Well, Josef, what's your question?
Oh, okay. So, yeah, let's start easy. Assuming that we have infinite amount of resource in the universe, would you say, or what would you say is a reason to push for sustainability? Like, if we can basically look at like human evolution in a sense of, well, if we just exhaust all the resources there are, why would we attempt to do anything sustainable here on Earth if we can just like push for space exploration and just like mine everything out there?
I see. Okay. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, because like when I hear the word sustainability in a crypto conversation, usually it's like, oh, are the core devs going to have enough money, and like, is the governance structure going to survive needing to find like new people who aren't the original founders, and all these kinds of questions. But here it's like old school sustainability. It's like like where's the nickel going to come from, dog? Right? Yeah, I mean, I think in general, like I'm very pro expanding into space, and I think it's the sort of thing that we're going to have to do eventually, and I think there's good rationales for that, even from the point of view of a different kind of sustainability, which is just like minimizing long-term risk, right? It's that if you have literally everyone on one planet and everyone has access to tools that can have all kinds of complicated impacts to each other, and like everyone has massive externalities with each other, like that's a really challenging structure to govern. That's a really challenging thing to maintain. That's something that could become really challenging if there is ever any large disagreements. And so I do believe in like space as a way of just like making it possible to have like both more distance and even more cultural diversity and those kinds of things in the long term. In terms of like physical resource use, I mean, this all depends on like how fast the different technologies go, right? Because like there's people who literally think that we're going to have super intelligent AI in 15 years, and if we have super intelligent AI in 50 years, then like that can solve all kinds of problems if it doesn't, of course, break the world first. But on the I think this is one of those things that can be debated, but like everything that I personally hear suggests that like there's definitely room to keep making new technologies and keep using existing resources in a way that's much more efficient. And I think like those things are good too. And I think it's amazing that we're creating solar panels that are much better. It's amazing that nuclear fusion might like finally be maybe 2 real decades away instead of like 2 like fake decades away. So yeah, I think like as often is the case, I'm a fan of sort of pursuing both directions at the same time. You know?
Are there more questions in the audience here?
Yeah.
Hi. What's your take on homomorphic encryption and how it could potentially like enhance Ethereum in the future? Do you think it's really close? And what do you think about the work that the team at Sama is doing?
Okay, finally something more down to earth. Okay, yeah, so I think the one concern I have with homomorphic encryption is basically that like it has a super high overhead, right? Like with ZK Synarchs, we're used to an overhead of like 1,000x or like somewhere between 1,000 and 10,000x if you do the circuit writing job well, but with fully homomorphic encryption, it's like way higher, right? It's like somewhere between a million and a billion X, and you can do basic circuits with that, right? Like I think people don't appreciate how even in modern applications, like the part of the application that does the important business logic is like, a few hundred bytes, and then the part that's like a few billion bytes is just random junk. And so, like it being a billion to a billion X overhead does not mean that it's not viable, but like it does put an upper limit on how much you can do with it. And then the other challenge is like with homomorphic encryption, you still need some party to decrypt the thing at the end. And there's a lot, like basically, there's a sense in which fully homomorphic encryption and MPC have a very similar trust model. And a lot of the time, you can take fully homomorphic encryption applications and make them more efficient just by doing MPC protocols instead, right? Because like FHE just basically means you do MPC, but with only one round of interaction, right? If you just like allow yourself to have 2 rounds or 3 rounds or a little bit more interaction, then often you can improve efficiency much more. Which actually gets me to the next topic, which basically is MPC, right? Because it does have less overhead than FHE, and the way that I think about that space is that there's like 2 flavors of MPC. There's sort of what the crypto space usually thinks of as being MPC, which is like these K event systems where you have like a committee and you need 6 out of 9 to do some computation, and then the whole thing breaks because it turns out that 5 of those 9 are on the same server and it gets hacked and people lose $250 million. But then, so like that type of MPC, I'm fairly bearish on, both because like the trust model is like actually not that good, right? Like the problem with these 51% trust assumptions is like on a blockchain, when you have an assumption that people are not going to 51% attack you, there's like actual accountability behind the assumption, right? Because if they do attack you, then like it's obvious to everyone on the internet what happened, and you can just like go and make a new chain and like go, even if all of the in-protocol slashing fails, you can go make a new chain and delete their money, right? But if you have a like MPC privacy preserving system, then if you have like 51% of them colluding and just quietly passing all the information to like JP Morgan or the NSA or the KGB or whoever else, then like that is completely undetectable, right? And with that, and so like if in any kind of mature ecosystem, like we would just totally have conspiracy theories all over the place about how like these committees are actually all colluding with governments, and like they'd have absolutely no way to refute any of that, right? So that's the reason why I'm like bearish on M of N MPC. The thing that I'm bullish on is like 2 of 2 and sometimes 3 of 3, right? So like technologies like garbled circuits, they've existed for decades and they're much simpler than these more complicated MPC protocols. And garbled circuits basically let you, say you provide a function, I provide the data, compute the output together, and we'll learn what the output is. And you can enhance these protocols so that you can add like ZK-SNARK style security properties on top of them and so forth, right? And the nice thing about the 2 of 2 trust model is that like it does have the kind of trust model that we expect, right? In the sense that like, let's say for example, you are, the government of, like ZK Landia, and you're deciding whether or not to give me a visa, and I have a bunch of like popes, a bunch of decentralized like ZK stamps, a bunch of credentials, whatever, that prove to me that like I'm the sort of person who deserves to get a visa to ZK Landia, right? But then you don't want to publicly reveal what the algorithm is, because if you do, then people are gonna like exploit it and like hyper optimize for it, and it becomes useless, right? And so I take my my set of like ZK credentials, you take your algorithm, compute it in a 2 of 2, and we both get the answer, right? And in that model, you do not learn any of my information. I do not learn your algorithm. And so it's like the trust model is still sort of perfect in that sense, right? Like if one of us does something wrong, the worst that can happen is that the person who does something wrong either gets a bad answer or gets a no answer. So I think that's like that's the sort of thing where it could possibly be the next frontier after just like pure ZK-SNARK applications. And then after 2 of 2, you could potentially extend to 3 of 3, right? So like for example, if you're let's say, yeah, instead of issuing visas to ZK India, you're making a dating service, and like you're deciding if Josef and I are compatible as a match, right? And I provide a bunch of like things about me. Josef provides a bunch of things about him, and then you run your algorithm, and then you like determine a match score, right? And like that's 3 of 3. And so like those kinds of like very small group things, like usually 2 of 2, maybe a little bit of 3 of 3, like that's the stuff that I'm more bullish on. And then more complicated stuff I'm less bullish on in the short term, but I think the door is open to it in the long term. Yeah, I just think that like that 2 of 2 and small group stuff, like it just has the right combination of being very close to viability and like having specific applications that make sense with trust models that people would really be easily be willing to go for, and then you go from there, and then we keep going.
Cool. Hi, I have 2 questions. In your current vision of Ethereum, do you consider it to be a nation state? And if so, what kind of role does neutrality play in the current world?
Good question. I would say I don't like comparing like blockchains to like any existing type of structure directly. And the reason is that like I think it shares a lot of similarities with many kinds of existing structures, right? So like blockchains are open source software, but unlike open source software, they also have this shared hard drive. Blockchains have a coin, but they're also not just about the coin, and unlike companies, they don't have a CAO. Blockchains have, often are religions, but unlike religions, they also have this like technology and coin and like a lot of things that you can do attached to them. And then blockchains are kind of like nation states in some sense, in that like they have this sort of top level sovereignty property, or at least they have it in theory, but then again, like even most nation states only have it in theory, right? Like there's lots of nation states that are like totally dependent on some agreement with the U.S. or some bigger country for their security, right? So blockchains, I think they do have some sovereignty in theory, in that they don't intentionally depend on a specific nation state as their kind of like base of sort of defense of last resort. They try to be independent of any specific single one, and that does, and they do try to achieve a certain kind of international neutrality. I would actually argue that blockchains try to achieve more international neutrality than nation states do, right? Because if you're a nation state, like you generally have trading partners, you have allies, you have enemies, you have the scary country off in the corner that you're constantly worried about. You have the place where you need to get your energy and like all of these things, right? And so the nation states seem to like have a very hard time being neutral in practice in the long term. I mean, even if you look at like Switzerland, for example, right? Like it's got this multi-100-year history of being getting this amazing reputation as this super neutral place. And that evolved in this context where it's sitting in the middle of like France and Germany and Italy, and France and Germany and Italy historically would fight each other for a long time. But then now, France and Germany and Italy are all part of the European Union, and like it's then is Switzerland going to be neutral between the European Union, which is the thing it's like literally in the middle of, and other things that the European Union is against, and like it gets harder, right? So yeah, I think like blockchains do try to achieve greater neutrality in that sense than nation states do. I mean, blockchains are in some sense obviously not perfectly neutral, right? Because like just the concept of being able to send transactions without being censored is a thing that some nation states are much more comfortable with than other nation states, right? And so there's there's a limit to how much neutrality exists, but they definitely do try to, just like as basic infrastructure, be intentionally less opinionated than a lot of other things. Though one of the challenges there is that like that doesn't mean that like a blockchain's community is also going to be neutral, right? Like if you think about like Bitcoin, for example, right? Like the Bitcoin blockchain is a totally neutral piece of software. You have blocks come out every 10 minutes. You have transactions, and like all it does is be money. But then, which Latin American country, like, would you say, if you had to say one, is like an ally of Bitcoin? And like, you'd probably come up with the same answer, right? Exactly. Like everyone would probably come up with the same answer. And like, that's not a property of the technology, that's a property of the people. And I think like any blockchain is just inevitably going to have those kinds of dynamics with parts of its community for social reasons. And I think like that's fine. And like, we shouldn't try to we shouldn't try to suppress it in a way that's fake, right? Like if, 80% of, like a huge portion of Ethereum people really do strongly believe that, like let's say, like the European Union is great, and like let's say, a bunch of other large countries around the world are dangerous, then like that's going to come out in the way the community behaves, right? And like if you try not to say that, then like if you try to hide things like that, then like people are gonna notice eventually, right? But then on the other hand, like you don't want to just randomly go all out and just like pick fights all the time and then like reduce your coalition down to like 5 people, right? So no, it's a balance. Like I think it's I don't want to I don't think we should be putting either blockchains or their communities or any of those things sort of into a box by trying to make them say that they are the same type of thing as a country or the same type of thing as a religion or the same type of thing as a company. I think they're like a different kind of thing that has some similarities of all of them, but also important differences, and we should remember both. Yeah.
So thanks for that. I want to follow up with another question. So I think in this one we talked a little bit about kind of adopting this framework of if we look at it as a nation, even if it's not and it's very different. We talk mostly about foreign policy, like how does a blockchain relate to different other entities that exist. But I also want to talk about internal policy. So if we say, okay, maybe we are in this religious phase, and as we progress to the next phases, and this trade phase, like in the foundation from Asimov, we will face different challenges.
Yes.
And right now we are seeing some of those challenges with centralization of staking, for example. And usually in a system like the US, if we're speedrunning financial history, this is the moment where regulators step in. But we don't have a credibly neutral regulator. So I'm wondering, how do you think about the future of these decisions, institutions, when we're based on this credibly neutral consensus?
It's a good question. I mean, I think like I guess the supremacy of the code is like in a blockchain is like high, but it's definitely not 100%, right? So like if, for example, quantum computers came out tomorrow, like we would absolutely, like who here would agree that we should hard fork to like deal with that somehow? Anyone want raise your hand if you think we should? Anyone think we shouldn't? Right. So, I think realistically, like if a hard fork is necessary to prevent like quantum computers from just like causing everyone to completely lose their money, then like it's going to happen, right? The difference between a blockchain and traditional structures is that like, well, there's different kinds of blockchains, right? So like if you look at Tezos, for example, they kind of explicitly embrace the idea that they're like a corporation and like they have voting and the voting can pass decisions. But in Ethereum, I think there is like an intentional desire to eschew a process, like to prevent there from being a process that has too much like unbounded legitimacy, right? And so like there are core devs, and if the core devs propose like, hey, we're gonna switch over to this other hash function, then like it's probably going to pass and no one's going to oppose, right? But if those exact same core devs propose like, hey, let's issue 30 million Ether and let's give that 30 million Ether to us, then like that's not going to pass, it's gonna create a hard fork and it's gonna cause all kinds of problems, right? So there's, like whether or not a decision can successfully get through depends not just on the sort of structure of like which individuals voted for it and which individuals did not, but also on like the actual content of the decision, right? And that's something that's like only really possible with this kind of off-chain informal structure. But at the same time, like I think it is a balance, right? Because the reason why people want to have this kind of informal structure is because they don't want there to be an organized force that can just like go off and start like grabbing away people's coins or whatever. But at the same time, you know, people do want something that is able to respond to threats, right? And like quantum computing is one example. But like other examples would be even just executing on the existing technical roadmap, right? Like dank sharding, proto-dank sharding, and then EVM improvements, then adjusting the roadmap in response to threats, right? So like, for example, there has been an existing roadmap to do change proof of stake over to single swap finality. But now that we've discovered that like, wait, there's also these other centralization concerns that need to be addressed, like maybe the single swap finality roadmap is gonna look a bit different, right? And that's one of those things where depending on the nature of the proposal that gets made, right? Like one thing that could happen is that the core devs, because like in general, the pattern is that the core devs have high legitimacy to do all kinds of things if the proposal is like, quote, purely technical. But then the core devs have much more limitations if the proposal is like, has economic meaning and it like affects people differently and it like gives some people coins and deletes other people's coins, right? And so maybe like one possible outcome is like the core devs figure out how to do a staking decentralization proposal in such a way that it does try to be as purely technical as possible and kind of avoid economic impacts as much as possible. And then if that happens, then it will just go through, right? Another possibility is like you can't do that, right? And basically, yeah, if, for example, you know, something like Lido got up to like 80% of Ethereum staking, but then there was a lot of community will to just like say this is unhealthy and we're gonna like we're gonna make it possible for people to do the thing that Lido lets them do without Lido, and because it's in protocol, it's gonna be better. Then like that means that there would be a hard fork that makes LDO tokens go down quite a lot, right? And like that's the sort of thing that would require a much greater level of legitimacy than just core developers. And so I see a couple of different paths forward, right? One of those paths forward is to just kind of embrace more governance minimization and just say like, we're going to just like do everything that we need to do using just these uncontroversial technical changes. The other path would be to try to create better signaling tools and to try to make it more clear what kinds of changes actually have the legitimacy to go forward, right? So one example of this was back in 2016 and 2017, where there were like a bunch of really controversial proposals going through, the DAO fork, EIP 999, which would have rescued the parity wallet, reducing the issuance from 5 to 3, reducing the issuance from 3 to 2. There were a bunch of different like voting systems that people just quickly created for those, right? There was something called Carbon Vote where you could go vote with your ETH. And then there was there were votes on GitHub, there were votes on Reddit. And people did just set up these votes, they participated in these votes, and people were able to see which way the wind is blowing for any particular proposal, right? And in 2023, we have the tools to make way more powerful signaling tools, right? Because we have ZK voting, we have POPs, we have ZooPass and DevConnect tickets, so you can now really easily cryptographically prove that you attended an Ethereum event. You can Gitcoin passport, we have all kinds of things, right? And so we could try to make much better signaling tools in order to just help give everyone a clear indication of what kinds of potentially radical ideas actually have pretty broad community support and which ones don't. And the benefit that this would give to core developers is there have been a lot of instances in Ethereum's history where Ethereum core devs worked really hard to make a particular proposal happen, and then at the last minute, an all core devs call happened, and then suddenly there wasn't enough momentum to push it through, and it was decided that this proposal is not good enough, we're not going to do it. And months of people's work got wasted, right? And this actually slows down Ethereum development because it basically creates this environment where even today core developers are often not willing to really commit and go into proposals that are, at least I think, actually good and important because they are afraid that well, is all core devs governance going to just go rug us at the last minute, right? And so if we did have better signaling, then that's a problem that we could avoid, right? But I think like one big, just kind of broader conclusion from all this, right, is that again, like blockchains are a different kind of thing from, nation states and corporations. I think the one metaphor that you might think about is like the judicial branch of a nation state, right? Like the courts, right? Like if you imagine a country where the parliament and the president and the prime minister just got kicked out, and so the laws would just not change, but the courts kept running, right? If you imagine like that kind of country, then like you would still have laws, you would still have interpretations of laws, it would still be able to keep going in a lot of ways. And a blockchain is probably fairly similar to that, but like one of the weaknesses of that is that over time, as you have to kind of rely more on clever interpretations of laws that were made a really long time ago to sort of do the legwork of adjusting to a modern world, the more like there is risk where people are uncertain about like what actually is going to be legal and what's not. And like basically what you have there is like an absence of good signaling tools, right? And so like that kind of government is like not really one that's historically been tried at all. And blockchains are probably trying the closest thing to that. So it is definitely like in a pretty new region of governance space. And I think there's a lot of interesting things that could be done to like better improve how we deal with it and how we make the best of it.
Hi.
Hi.
I would like,
I like your mask, by the way.
I would like to follow up on two privacy events
Yeah.
or sessions which we have had here during the DCxPrague. We are designing the Czech stablecoin with all the innovative bells and whistles like streaming, real-time finance, and so on, the multi-chain aspect. But what I'm more concerned about is what I would call like branch attack resistance.
Okay.
I remember you somehow addressed a little bit this topic with the stealth addresses in, I think it was in June.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit further if there is any research in this so-called branch attack resistance with respect
How would you
to
describe a branch
to
attack?
stablecoins or ERC20s?
Yeah, how would you describe a branch attack? Yeah, I'm asking, like, what's your definition of a branch attack?
Yeah, well, what would be the best to avoid that, basically? I mean, good advice. What's your definition of a branch? The definition. Oh, sorry, I'm hearing it. Yeah. Well, because you actually have that ERC, when you have the ERC20, you have, in fact, comparable to the traditional finance, like open banking account, the transparent one where anyone can see that, the ERC20 was transferred. So immediately you are being addressed physically for whatever you have there in the possession. So that's what I would call a branch attack. If you are aware of XXCD, that comic which was showing about that.
Oh, the $5.
Yeah.
Branch with a W. Okay.
Yes,
I thought like a branch condition. I got confused. Okay.
Not branch.
Yeah,
Right.
branch attacks. Yeah, I mean,
So
I think if we want to deal with branch attacks specifically, then like what we basically need is we need more like we do need privacy tools, but we need like particular types of privacy tools, right? Like basically tools that where you can't just like go and like check on Etherscan and see like, wait, this guy actually has a huge amount of money, right? So I think stealth addresses do solve the problem, and I think just like privacy pools type schemes also kind of solve the problem. But the other part of the problem, of course, is like from a user's wallet's point of view, like you don't necessarily want it even to be visible, even from a user's wallet, what all of their different assets are, right? So that's a user interface problem. I don't really know what the best answer is right now, but that's definitely something that's probably seems good to work on. And then from a blockchain point of view, I would say, yeah, the right solution basically is to encourage more use of privacy protocols. And then another thing is like the relationships between different individuals that are on chain also need better privacy, right? I mean, even things that like guardians for social recovery and multi-sig wallets, right? Like it should not be easy to see like who all of the guardians for a particular multi-sig wallet are, right? And like there are ways to make guardians more privacy preserving. We just have to like implement the right code for them. And then like there's other examples of relationships, like just like if like Vitalik.eth sends a transaction to whatever your .eth is, then like that should not be visible as a public link, and like stealth addresses also solve that problem, right? So yeah, I think it's like a combination of these different technologies for a couple of different use cases. Like there's the right kind of use of both stealth addresses and other kinds of privacy preserving tools, and there is a standardization challenge in like making things like Guardians more privacy preserving.
With the same topic, sorry, I will leave more questions to the rest of the people so I don't take too much time. So what about the plausible deniability, basically being able to say from the same wallet, I'm able to derive many, in theory, infinite numbers of wallets, so you're able to basically generate multi-sub-wallets, and at the same time adding to some kind of mechanism to that, something like time lock encryption, where you can delay the attack, even if the $5 range attack, having like different stages.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, like the idea that large amounts of money should be stored in a vault that has a time delay is a really good one. Like, yeah, time delays are brilliant. I think wallet security setups should use time delays much more. The whole like plausible deniability thing, I think, is I think it's cool and I think it should exist. I mean, I wonder like how easy or how hard it would be to actually get adopted, given that like I feel like that stuff never got super far for just like regular like desktop hard drive encryption, right? Like TrueCrypt really tried, but it only kind of got there. So yeah, I guess I see that as a UX challenge.
We talked previously about FHE and the way it's not easily tractable. What uses do you see for FE functional encryption in overall?
Honestly, within the crypto space, probably not that many yet. I think I think like probably efficient enough FE is like still far away enough that we haven't like really seriously started like going through the use cases. So yeah, don't have a good answer.
Hi, yeah, blockchain tech has the potential to start establishing causality in the social sphere, for example, using POAPs. Does Ethereum's remit extend into the social sphere as it applies to making media more transparent and verifiable?
I mean, there's definitely applications that can make media more transparent and verifiable. I think it depends on like which specific piece of media you're trying to make more transparent and more, yeah. Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of the problem here is like, it's the same thing as the Oracle problem, right? The problem of like, how does a blockchain know what happens in the real world? And like, the thing that you can do, for example, right? And the thing that we could do with with like much more standardization work is just having better guarantees of of the correctness of things that people said, right? Like right now you can like screenshot someone's tweet and like no one really knows if that tweet was like actually real or it was fake, right? And if we like somehow make the internet more natively signed and natively verifiable, then like that's a problem that could get solved more easily. But then if you talk about some events that happened in the real world, then the question is like, what is your ultimate source of truth that like anyone is going off of, right? And I'm not convinced that that side of things is really a blockchain problem. Like it could be, like you could improve on it a little bit with trusted hardware, right? Like you know, you could say like, okay, we're going to have like cameras and the cameras will have attestations, and then you could like do some blockchain thing to timestamp it, which you know, I guess is totally a good idea, right? But yeah, I guess the part of that problem that is like a blockchain problem is definitely far from 100%. It's more of a kind of like technologically hardening the entire ecosystem of like how we learn about facts that happen in the real world and how we get that information to people problem.
Hi.
So we have about 10
Okay, I have a follow-up about what you said about MPC wallets.
Yeah.
And the fact that some bugs are, some exploits are undetectable. Okay, so the same probably hold true for many ZK-based chains, like Zcash had the same issue with toxic waste and the bugs that they had several years ago. So you said that you were quite bearish about MPC. So what's your stance on these kind of chains?
Yeah. Well, there's like the short term and the long term, right? So like in the short term, ZK bugs are absolutely undetectable, but that's something that can be fixed over time. My concern with MPC protocols is more like MPC protocols inherently have a trust assumption, right? Like you have an M of N and there's like specific N that you have to choose. And like that's not a bug, that's just like how the thing is. So it's yeah, like there are definitely some NPC use cases that make a lot of sense, but like the ones where you try to get everyone to trust the same committee of 12 people, like that's the sort of stuff that I'm not really in favor of, basically, just because there are these trust uses, like this undetectable trust problem that like you can't get away just by formally verifying the code better. And then in terms of like how to reduce the risk of bugs in these ZK systems, I think in the short term, the best answer we have is multi-provers, right? Like requiring a block to have proofs from multiple different proof systems in order to be accepted. And that's the direction that all the rollups are going right now. And then we'll see what happens in the future. Like we might get much better formal verification technology, or we might get something else, and we'll see.
So as Ethereum starts to get more mainstream adoption, we see people gathering around groups like DAOs, collectives, communities. And I'm wondering how to really, how you would suggest addressing the challenge of like proof of unique identity, in particular when related to voting or rewards or anything in that nature.
Proof of unique identity is a hard problem. I mean, I think there's basically two different families of approaches to it, right? Like one family is the biometric approach, which is like either, WorldCoin or some of these more kind of lower, less specialized hardware-dependent solutions or something else. And then of course there's also like centralized stuff like bootstrapping off of government identity. And then social graph stuff is basically like, here are these like 5 people who all attest that you are a unique human, and then those 5 people have already passed into the system, and so you probably are a unique human as well, right? And I think all of these approaches have different trade-offs that, so like for example, the problem with the social graph approach is that it's like very hard for it to scale across like outside of the community where it started, right? So like there's a bunch of these systems like there were circles, there were some others, and they do a very good job of getting adoption within the community that initiated them. But then if you ask like, how is someone in a country in the middle of Africa or Southeast Asia or like where else that's like very far away from the initial user base supposed to get into the system? And like there's no good answer, right? Because like they don't know anyone who's in the system. They don't even know anyone who knows someone who's in the system, right? The distances are like too large, and so like there's just no good way for them to participate. Then biometrics, I think the big advantage of biometrics is that they are really universal in that way, right? Because like any human has biometrics and can get accepted, right? And when India rolled out their Aadhaar system over the last year, over the last decade, one of the big advantages of biometrics, because like Aadhaar does rely on biometrics in a kind of similar way to what WorldCoin does, is that like it is actually able to go and enroll people in random villages far off in the mountains and like have a pretty good guess that this actually is a unique person and it's not someone trying to get like 5 different identities. And they do all of this despite those people not being plugged into any kind of existing networks, right? And like that's an actual advantage. But at the same time, like biometrics in the long term definitely have a lot of security problems that they involve all of these centralized trust issues. And then the third one is like going off of existing government IDs like passports. And the concern I have with that is like, on the one hand, it's like there's a lot of existing infrastructure. There's a lot of like stuff that you can really easily bootstrap off of, right? But the problem is that once something that depends on passports gets institutionalized. And like, one is that there's going to be people who live in countries whose passports just like do not support whatever digital proof scheme that you're using, right? And so you are going to exclude a lot of people. And then two is that like malicious governments could totally just like print an unlimited number of fake identities because they control the keys that print the passports, right? So yeah, like basically, so there's these three families of schemes that have different kinds of properties. I think my general view is that relying on like either biometrics or centralized trust-based ideas in the short term is okay, but then in the long term, you probably don't want to rely on them. And in the long term, you want to do social graph stuff, and then once you have a system that's kind of bootstrapped to a reasonable level of fairness using things other than the social graph methods, then like maintaining it using social graph methods becomes much easier than like using social graph methods to start one from scratch. Yeah.
Continuing the question of use cases and adoption, you have a lot of experience in blockchain and you travel a lot. Do you see the travel industry as one of the industries that can have impact of blockchain, taking into consideration that there are a lot of data breaches?
Yeah.
The travel is global, but it's hardly like it's a lot of fragmentation in there in the technology, and like will it create a new wave of mass adoption of blockchain or blockchains as technologies?
Will the travel industry create a lot of mass adoption? I think it depends on like which specific use case you have in mind, right? Because like, I think the easiest use case that's like within travel is just giving people easier access to international like payments and getting their money to be accessible in lots of different countries. And that's still something that like big parts of the world struggle with in a lot of ways. So that is a place where I think blockchains could have a big impact. There's like other more specialized applications like, can you sell tickets on chain, which I think is like really cool and interesting. Better than like trying really hard to create a lot of like newer and much fancier things. And then also I think there are ways to create protocols in a way that minimizes like the fund holding load that they have, right? Like if you think about like even trading protocols, like things like cross-chain exchange, for example, like you can design that in such a way that doesn't rely on liquidity pools, right? And like you can design it in a way that relies more on just kind of off-chain protocols, kind of limit orders, like based on top of open standards and those kinds of things. And like basically, yeah, avoid like cross-chain bridging in general, right? Like if you have coins on, like if you have coins on layer 1, then like having those coins on layer 2 is probably like is fine, but like having these like trusted multi-sig bridges that like jump between all kinds of systems, like the more you can avoid doing that, and the more that you can just like hold assets in the same place where the assets are issued, and then if you need to do things across chain, do it by trading instead of doing it by holding, then probably the better. So yeah, I don't know, that's like probably my main opinion on this, just kind of like stick to lower risk and more boring stuff. Sure.
Hi. So I saw you chatting at Zuzulu about AI crypto. We were talking about existential risk and use cases. Curious, like, do you have any new thoughts on use cases around AI and crypto, and any projects you maybe have seen that are interesting, or like directions that have kind of sprouted out over the last months?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I feel like everyone wants there to be an intersection between crypto and AI, and like there are some intersections that exist, but they're always like I think smaller than people expect there to be, right? So like there is ZKML, and I think ZKML can actually be useful, right? So like for example, you could do things like scan someone's face and then run a ZKML model and then verify whether or not they're a member of some group without actually learning anything about their identity, right? And like that's a privacy gain, and like that's useful, and you can do that, but like that's not the sort of thing that's going to make or break civilization, right? And as far as like things that make or break civilization go, I feel like the big challenge with AI is that like the space is creating things whose capability is on a trajectory that's rapidly improving, and at some point this century it's going to become significantly more powerful on like basically all dimensions than humans are. And once that happens, then that's like that carries a lot of risks, right? For like very obvious reasons, right? And the question is like, what is even the role of humans going to be in that kind of world? And if we don't want the role, like if we don't want the role of humans to just be sort of completely powerless, then like either we have to merge with the AIs, or we have to control the AIs, or some combination of both. And like part of that is a governance challenge, and possibly there's like ideas from DAOs and ideas from other kinds of cryptocurrency applications that might actually help. Possibly there's ideas from other kinds of technologies. I think that the one place that where the crypto, like ideas from the crypto space might be more useful is like actually in kind of governing the transition, right? So one example of this is like even just things like kill switches, right? Like over the last 3 days, we saw a completely non-transparent backroom attempt to do something to OpenAI, apparently because of fears that the company was going too fast and like acting recklessly in certain ways, right? And this is the sort of thing where like if we want to have a governance mechanism that really gets accepted by the world on like this kind of really consequential topic, then like it has to be more open and democratic in some way, and actually getting sentiment from large groups of people at scale is like the sort of thing that ZK technology and other kinds of things could actually be good at doing. And so potentially if we figure out how to do like signaling tools for the purpose of making better Ethereum hard forks, then like we might be able to just like use that same technology and then use those same tools to do like real-time polling around AI, and like possibly even like do when the time and when the time comes, like have kill switches that are directly connected to things like that, for example, right? And like that would at least be less of this kind of totally undemocratic stuff than what's been happening so far, and it might actually work efficiently enough to be effective. Like this is all very early stage thoughts, right? But like I think that's the sort of thing that is absolutely worth starting to think about.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We are on time, so I just want to finish up with like one last question and perhaps an appeal.
Yeah.
We touched on adoption. We touched on the various use cases. Where we touched on the comparisons between blockchains and like blockchain communities and nation states. Now, like one topic that I'm perhaps like interested in is how. What do you think the local communities like within the nation states should do to basically get their own nation states, their like local governance to adopt and like integrate blockchains into their own infrastructure, just as it like happened with the internet or like various different technologies?
Right. I feel like actually one of the simplest things to integrate might actually be ZooPass, right? It's the zero knowledge identity system that got created inside of Zuzulu earlier this year, and then it actually got used for tickets at DevConnect. But basically, it's like a system where users can hold information and then make zero knowledge proofs about their information. And so you could do things like, for example, prove that you have a particular ticket without revealing anything about which ticket you have or anything else about yourself, right? And that, like now, ZooPass has been successfully used and deployed on a multi-thousand person scale. And so it's the sort of thing that like absolutely is ripe for starting to do like local government experimentation with. So I think that's a good place to start. And then once you have that, then just because the crypto world is so amenable to being connected together by zero knowledge proofs, so like you basically could have, like government attestations and Ethereum address attestations within the same wallet, and then like we can start integrating those two worlds together and like building applications that take advantage of both of those.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you again for joining us here today.